All right, y'all. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I got this article pulled up from Investopedia, and they're just going to be talking about dividends from stocks in the stock market, kind of what they are and how they work. And I'm just going to be reading the article and then kind of going a little bit more in depth to kind of give y'all a brief idea of how they work in a generalized concept. So y'all can use that information to go from there and dig in a little further and maybe learn something and maybe figure out how to use them to your financial advantage. So with that being said, let's get into the article. They say, what is a cash dividend? A cash dividend is a distribution of funds or money paid to stockholders, generally as part of the corporation's current earnings or accumulated profits. Cash dividends are paid directly in money as opposed to being paid as a stock dividend or other form of value. Okay, so in simplified terms, company makes profits from selling. Let's say they sell steel rods. Okay, well they sell so many steel rods in the month of December, and after all expenses and everything, they have $1,000 in the bank, and they have 10 shareholders. Well, the company can choose to either take that $1,000 that they got in the bank and reinvest it back into the company for more growth or different projects or research and development or whatever, any numerous reasons. But what a lot of companies do, and by a lot, I mean quite a few, but it's not as many companies do this as don't do it. But a lot of companies will say, okay, we've reached a point in our company's maturity since the company has grown so much that they can't grow as fast anymore. So they're like, okay, we're basically turned into a cash cow that can't move around the market as fast. So we might as well start paying our shareholders that were loyal and have held onto our stock for a long time. We might as well pay them a little bit of cash from our profits to basically show that we appreciate them being shareholders. That's the generalized idea. The company has stopped being able to grow exponentially as much on reinvested capital. So they're just like, well, we'll go ahead and give some of that capital that we earn back to the people that invested in us in the first place. So that's the basic concept behind a dividend. Is it's just the company has decided to pay out some of their profits to their shareholders for one reason or another. Okay. Key takeaways: a cash dividend is a payment doled out by a company to its stockholders in the form of periodic distributions of cash. Okay. Now, here's something I kind of want to get into is dividend payments can be made in multiple different ways. They can be paid every so often, a repeat payment, like let's say AT&T, for example, before they had all the fiasco that they're going through now, used to pay a dividend quarterly. Now, quarterly is broken up into 4 times a year. There's 4 quarters in a year, so every quarter AT&T would pay a dividend back to their shareholders. So some companies pay dividends by quarter. Some companies, now there's a lot less of these, some companies pay their dividend literally every single month. So they'll make a monthly dividend payment, and all these dividend payments go into your brokerage account. It just shows up as a cash amount directly into your brokerage account. So some companies will pay monthly, which is really good if you like consistent income, because it's like, hey, I'm getting money monthly. So there's quarterly dividend stocks, there's monthly dividend stocks. Then we start getting into the less frequent ones. There's twice a year dividend stocks where they pay out a dividend 2 times a year, and that's it. They don't pay no more. They just pay twice a year. Then you get into the annualized dividend companies. Now, there aren't very many of these that I've found. There are some, but there aren't nearly as many. but they pay one time a year, and that's the only time they pay one dividend payment a year. Most of the time, these kind of companies are still focused on growth because they can still get a higher return, outsized return on the capital that they reinvest. But they're still like, well, let's go ahead and show some of our shareholders our appreciation in the form of money. So there's that. There's the 2 time a year dividend companies. Then there's the single time a year dividend companies, and then you got companies that I really don't consider dividend companies because they don't pay out regular dividend payments. They're just like, they just decide one day, the board of directors is just like, you know what? Let's pay out a gigantic dividend. And it's just out of the blue, they make a decision and they pay out some of their profits that they've had stocked up for a long time. They just decide to pay them out. Now, me personally, I don't consider those companies dividend companies because they don't pay out on a set schedule. But that's just me. But some companies, be aware, some companies do pay dividends like that. Then they give an example of cash dividends. They say right here, cash dividends are a common way for companies to return capital to their shareholders in the form of periodic cash payments, typically quarterly, but some stocks may pay these bonuses on a monthly, annual, or semi-annual basis. Exactly what I was talking about. Okay, and then we get right here. While many firms pay regular dividends, there are special cash dividends. That's what I was talking about, the out of the blue dividends. Now he's talking about that. Special cash dividends that are distributed to shareholders after certain non recurring events, such as legal settlements or borrowing money for a large one time cash distribution. Some companies do this. They're like, you know what? We should treat our shareholders to dividends. We're going to go to a bank and borrow money to then give to our shareholders. Some companies do this stuff just to appease their shareholders, and you got to be real careful about this because if you get involved with a company that's doing this, it can be a telltale sign of the management team and the board of directors being terrible at their jobs and having their heads up their rear, to say the least. So be aware when companies are borrowing money to pay out dividends. It's like, come on now. That right there tells me, one, you're incompetent. Two, your company's probably not making money at all. So just be aware of that. Okay. And cash, they say right here, cash dividends are paid on a per share basis. So what they do is they say, okay, each share of Apple stock, we're going to pay $1 a year. Okay, well, that Apple stock, if you hold 2 Apple stocks, then you get $2 in dividends a year. You see how that works? That's what they mean by cash dividends are paid on a per share basis. Then they say right here, the timing of cash dividends. A company's board of directors announces a cash dividend on a declaration date, which entails paying a certain amount of money per common share. After that notification, the record date is established, which is the date on which a firm determines its shareholders on record who are eligible for payment. Basically, the board of directors says, we want to pay out a cash dividend. And they say, okay, when are we going to do it? Well, we're going to declare we're going to make a payment on this date. When they declare it, that is called the declaration date. Okay? And then they set a second day after the declaration date called the record date. If you don't own the shares before the record date, you are not entitled to that dividend and will not receive it. So be aware of that. Then they say, in addition, stock exchanges or other appropriate securities organizations determine an ex-dividend date, which is typically 2 business days before the record date. Okay, this ex-dividend date here, my advice is if you want to buy a company, that pays a dividend and you want to make dang sure you get the dividend, you better pay it a decent, at least a couple of days before the ex-dividend date, or you may not get it because the record date and the ex-dividend date are so close together that you may not get it. You may not be on the record. So just be aware of that. Okay. Which companies pay dividends? Companies that pay dividends typically enjoy stable cash flows and their businesses are commonly beyond the growth stage. For example, power companies, for example, AEP, American Electric Power. That is a company that they're well beyond their growth stage for the most part, but they have a consistent, stable business that, quite frankly, ain't going anywhere. A lot of companies that pay dividends is pipeline companies because once they set up the infrastructure and stuff, it's a cash flow business. It basically operates like a toll road, but for oil. Any kind of company that's stable, ultra stable, but doesn't see a lot of, they're not constantly doing new things, is probably going to be more likely to pay a dividend because they're not growing, but they're extremely stable. So, okay. And something I want to get into too is dividend yield. You'll see a lot of times you'll go into your brokerage account and you'll look up a stock and it'll say dividend yield and it'll have the dollar amount in a year and then it'll have the APY in a percentage. Now, what a lot of people do is they go dividend hunting for that high percentage. But what they don't realize is that percentage number changes based on the stock price. The amount that you get paid stays the same, but the percentage fluctuates based on the current market price of the stock. So a lot of times people that they call dividend hunters will go looking for dividend stocks paying 15, 16, 17% interest a year in dividends, and they're like, ooh, I got a real good bargain. This stock pays 16% in dividends. But what they don't realize is that the reason why that percentage is so high is because that dividend stock may have dropped off and it may be in bad financial shape and it can't pay its dividend. So a lot of times, not necessarily, but a lot of times ultra high yield in the percentage dividend stocks that's got like 14, 15% interest a year, a lot of times those companies are in financial strain and that dividend is going to get cut eventually and probably quicker rather than later. So just be aware of that. It can be very detrimental to your investing. So that's just my brief overview of kind of like what dividends are, how they kind of work, and this is general information so that when y'all decide to look into them, y'all can start with this video and maybe have a little bit more information to go and dig a little further if you want to invest in dividend stocks. With that being said, that's all I have for today. I just wanted to kind of bring this article up and read through it and give y'all something to think about. So that's all I got for today, and I will see y'all in the next video. Please give a like and subscribe, and y'all have a good one.